Let's start with the first case in Northern California, 1968. A serial killer is on the loose, but this isn't your typical murderer. He doesn't just stalk his victims in the night. He taunts the world with cryptic letters, strange symbols, and an arrogance that suggests he'll never be caught. He calls himself the Zodiac, and his reign of terror would span nearly a decade, leaving a trail of fear and mystery in his wake. To this day, his identity remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American history. The Zodiac Killer's first known victims were high school students Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday. It was December 20th, 1968, a quiet night in the small town of Vallejo, California. The young couple parked on a remote road, likely looking for some privacy, when the Zodiac struck. David was shot in the head, and Betty Lou was shot multiple times as she tried to run. It was a cold, calculated double murder, and it was just the beginning. Over the next several years, the Zodiac would go on to claim at least 5 more victims, though he boasted of killing 37 people in total. His victims were usually young couples, attacked in remote locations, often at night. But it wasn't just the brutality of the crimes that terrified people. It was the way the killer seemed to relish in the attention. He sent letters to local newspapers, daring the police to catch him, including cryptic ciphers that, when decoded, revealed chilling messages like, "I like killing people because it is so much fun." The Zodiac's arrogance only grew as the murders continued. On July 4th, 1969, Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau were sitting in their car at a remote lover's lane in Vallejo when the Zodiac struck again. He shot both victims at close range. Darlene died instantly, but Michael survived, providing police with a description of the attacker, a man with short, curly hair, likely in his 20s or 30s. Despite this clue, the Zodiac slipped away unnoticed, as he would continue to do for years. "I am not afraid of the gas chamber," the Zodiac wrote in one of his letters, "because it will send me to paradise all the sooner." He was taunting not just the police, but the entire state of California. And the ciphers he sent to the newspapers? Some remain unsolved to this day, decades later, keeping the mystery alive. The Zodiac didn't just want to kill, he wanted to play a game, and everyone was a part of it. He marked each of his letters with a crosshair symbol that often included bizarre clues about his next move. But despite the massive manhunt and countless suspects, no one has ever been definitively identified as the Zodiac. One of the most notorious suspects was Arthur Lee Allen, a man with a troubled past and a history of violence. Investigators zeroed in on Allen for years, and many of the clues seemed to point in his direction. But there was never enough evidence to convict him, and he died in 1992, taking any secrets he might have had to the grave. Over the decades, the Zodiac's legend has only grown. Books, movies, and documentaries have tried to piece together the puzzle, but the killer remains an enigma. One of the few pieces of concrete evidence, the Zodiac's cryptic ciphers, continues to haunt investigators and amateur sleuths alike. In fact, it wasn't until 2020 that one of his most famous ciphers was finally cracked, revealing a chilling message, but offering no further clues about his identity. Despite years of investigation, the Zodiac remains one of the most famous and elusive criminals in history. His letters and ciphers were designed to mock the police, and it's that arrogance, coupled with the sheer randomness of his crimes, that continues to terrify people to this day. The killer could have been anyone, a neighbor, a friend, a passerby on the street. And though his voice has been silent for years, his words continue to echo through the decades, leaving us wondering if the truth will ever come to light. Until then, the Zodiac Killer remains one of the darkest mysteries in American history, a case that may never be solved. But the Zodiac isn't the only killer whose identity remains a mystery. Our next case takes us to post-war Los Angeles, where a young woman's tragic death became one of the most famous unsolved murders of the 20th century, known as the Black Dahlia case. Los Angeles, 1947. In the midst of a post-war boom, the city was buzzing with dreams of glamour and fame. But beneath the glitz of Hollywood, there was a darker side to the City of Angels, a side that was about to be revealed in one of the most gruesome and sensational murder cases in American history. This is the story of Elizabeth Short, a young woman whose brutal death became known as the Black Dahlia case, a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. On January 15, 1947, the body of 22-year-old Elizabeth Short was found in an empty lot in Leimert Park, Los Angeles. Her body was mutilated, cut clean in half at the waist, and posed in a shocking manner. Her face had been slashed from ear to ear in a grotesque Glasgow smile. Despite the brutal nature of the crime, there were no signs of struggle and no blood at the scene, leading investigators to believe that she had been killed elsewhere and then dumped in the vacant lot. Elizabeth had come to Los Angeles with dreams of becoming an actress, but like so many others, she struggled to find her big break. She was often seen in the company of men, staying in cheap hotels and borrowing money from friends. Her lifestyle made her an easy target for public scrutiny, and the media quickly labeled her as a temptress, a woman whose dangerous beauty had led to her untimely demise. As the details of the case began to emerge, the media frenzy surrounding the Black Dahlia murder exploded. Newspapers across the country plastered Elizabeth Short's face on their front pages, speculating about her lifestyle and spinning salacious rumors about her private life. The press sensationalized every aspect of the case, portraying Elizabeth as a mysterious femme fatale and the murder as a Hollywood noir come to life. But for the police, the case was far more frustrating than it was glamorous. They were faced with a lack of physical evidence and a flood of false confessions. Over 150 people, both men and women, came forward to claim responsibility for the murder, but none of them could provide details that matched the crime scene. Meanwhile, hundreds of suspects were questioned, but none could be definitively linked to the crime. What made the Black Dahlia case so perplexing was the killer's precision and lack of motive. Whoever had killed Elizabeth had done so with surgical skill, leaving her body in a state that suggested the killer had some form of medical training. The police searched for connections between Elizabeth's death and local doctors or morticians, but none of their leads panned out. The case grew colder with each passing day. For decades, theories about the Black Dahlia's killer have swirled, some more convincing than others. One of the most popular theories involves Dr. George Hodel, a well-connected physician who became a prime suspect after his son, Steve Hodel, a former LAPD detective, claimed that his father had been the Black Dahlia murderer. Steve pointed to circumstantial evidence, such as his father's access to medical tools and his eerie fascination with surrealist art that mirrored the manner in which Elizabeth's body was posed. Dr. Hodel's ties to the case grew even more suspicious when recordings surfaced of him allegedly saying, "Suppose I did kill the Black Dahlia, they can't prove it now." Yet, despite these chilling details, no concrete evidence has ever tied Dr. Hodel or anyone else to the murder. The Black Dahlia case represents more than just a murder. It's a reflection of a city consumed by its own dark allure. Hollywood's streets, lined with dreams of fame, can sometimes lead to deadly ends. Elizabeth Short was a young woman who came to the city hoping to make it in the movies, but instead, she became the star of a real-life horror story. Today, the Black Dahlia case remains a touchstone for true crime enthusiasts and conspiracy theorists alike. But while the Black Dahlia's murder is shrouded in mystery, our next case takes us to a small California town where an entire family was brutally slaughtered in their cabin. A crime that shook the community to its core and remains unsolved to this day. This is the story of the Keddie Cabin murders. In the quiet town of Keddie, tucked away in the Sierra Nevada mountains of Northern California, a family vacation turned into one of the most brutal, unsolved murder cases in American history. It was 1981, and the Sharp family was staying in Cabin 28 at the Keddie Resort. What happened there would send shockwaves through the small community and remain a haunting mystery to this day. On the morning of April 12, 1981, a horrific scene was discovered in Cabin 28. Inside, 36-year-old Glenna Sue Sharp, her 15-year-old son John, and his 17-year-old friend Dana Wingate were found brutally murdered. They had been beaten and stabbed repeatedly, their bodies left in a chaotic and blood-soaked cabin. The violence of the crime was staggering, but what made it even more disturbing was the fact that Sue's 12-year-old daughter Tina was missing from the scene. Perhaps the strangest part of this case? 3 younger children, Sue's sons Rick and Greg, along with their friend, were found unharmed in another room of the cabin, completely unaware of the massacre that had taken place just feet away. The brutality of the crime, coupled with the apparent lack of motive, baffled investigators. The crime scene was chaotic, with signs of a violent struggle, furniture overturned, blood spattered on the walls. The killer or killers had left behind a bloody hammer and knife, but little else in the way of useful evidence. Despite the sheer brutality of the crime, no one in the nearby cabins reported hearing screams or signs of a disturbance. The mystery only deepened when, 3 years later, the skeletal remains of Tina Sharp were discovered nearly 50 miles away in rural Plumas County. Her remains were found by a man searching for bottles in the woods, adding another layer of confusion to an already perplexing case. How did Tina's body end up so far from the scene of the crime, and why was she the only victim removed from the cabin? One of the most compelling aspects of the Keddie Cabin murders is the series of strange events leading up to the crime. In the weeks before the murders, several unsettling things happened around the cabin. Lights flickering, mysterious phone calls, and reports of strange men seen around the area. Sue had recently separated from her abusive husband and moved to Keddie to start a new life. But some theorize that she may have been followed by someone from her past. The investigation into the murders was plagued by missteps and oversights. Initially, law enforcement zeroed in on a local man, Martin Smart, and his friend, Bo Bubede, both of whom were staying in a nearby cabin on the night of the murders. Martin Smart was Sue's neighbor, and it was later revealed that his wife had left him after the murders, claiming he had confessed to the killings. Bo Bubede, meanwhile, had a criminal history and suspicious ties to organized crime. Years later, new evidence surfaced that cast even more suspicion on Smart and Bubede. In 2016, investigators uncovered a letter written by Smart to his wife shortly after the murders, in which he stated, "I've paid the price for your love, and now that I've bought it with 4 lives, you tell me we are through." Despite the incriminating nature of the letter, it was not enough to formally reopen the case, and both Smart and Bubede have since passed away, taking any secrets they had with them to the grave. The Keddie Cabin murders remain one of the most perplexing unsolved cases in the U.S. The small resort town of Keddie has never fully recovered from the horror that unfolded in Cabin 28. The crime scene itself was torn down in 2004, and the once bustling Keddie Resort has become a ghost town. But the mystery lingers, with theories ranging from revenge killings to botched drug deals to deep conspiracy involving local law enforcement. But while the Keddie Cabin murders left a small town reeling, our next case involves a crime that captivated the entire nation. The death of a young beauty queen in Boulder, Colorado, remains one of the most famous unsolved murder cases in American history. This is the story of JonBenét Ramsey. Christmas night, 1996. Boulder, Colorado. The Ramsey family home was festively decorated, filled with the joy of the holiday season. But what began as a peaceful night quickly turned into one of the most infamous unsolved murder cases in American history. The tragic death of 6-year-old beauty queen JonBenét Ramsey. The next morning, on December 26th, JonBenét's mother, Patsy Ramsey, frantically called 911 after discovering a ransom note on the stairs. The note, demanding $118,000 for JonBenét's safe return, was bizarrely specific, and yet the family was wealthy enough to meet the demand. But just hours later, JonBenét's body was discovered in the basement of her own home, hidden behind a door that had previously gone unnoticed. She had been strangled with a garrote made from a nylon cord and her own paintbrush, and her skull was fractured from a blow to the head. Immediately, the investigation was marred by mistakes. The crime scene was contaminated, as family friends, police officers, and investigators unknowingly trampled through the house, possibly destroying crucial evidence. Despite the ransom note and signs of forced entry, police quickly became suspicious of the family. How could JonBenét's parents and brother have been asleep while such a violent crime occurred in their home? Why would a kidnapper leave her body in the house and still demand a ransom? The ransom note itself became one of the most perplexing pieces of evidence. It was unusually long and written on Patsy's own stationery, leading many to suspect it had been staged. Handwriting analysis of the note pointed toward Patsy as a possible author, but the results were inconclusive. Adding to the confusion, the specific amount demanded in the note, $118,000, was almost exactly the amount John Ramsey had recently received as a bonus from his company. Was the killer someone who knew the family, or was it a strange coincidence? As the investigation dragged on, theories abounded. Some believed an intruder had broken into the house intending to kidnap JonBenét, but had accidentally killed her during the attempt. Others pointed to the Ramseys themselves, with suspicions falling on either Patsy or JonBenét's older brother, Burke. The media frenzy surrounding the case was relentless, and as the public watched, the lines between fact and speculation became increasingly blurred. Over the years, the case has remained a source of fascination and controversy. Theories range from a kidnapping gone wrong to more sinister ideas involving child exploitation rings. Despite numerous leads and hundreds of interviews, no one has ever been charged with her murder. In 2008, DNA testing cleared the Ramseys of any involvement, leading the Boulder District Attorney's Office to officially apologize to the family. However, this hasn't silenced the many who still believe the truth lies within the Ramsey home. Patsy Ramsey passed away in 2006, leaving behind a legacy of suspicion and heartbreak, while John and Burke Ramsey have tried to move on, despite the public's ongoing fascination with the case. What makes the JonBenét Ramsey case so unsettling is not just the brutal nature of the crime, but the fact that it happened in the safety of the family's own home, a place where JonBenét should have been safe, surrounded by the people who loved her most. The combination of a wealthy, well-known family, the bizarre ransom note, and the media's endless speculation has turned the case into a modern-day mystery that may never be solved. Today, JonBenét's story remains one of the most infamous unsolved murders in America. The answer, it seems, may forever remain just out of reach. While JonBenét's case captivated the entire nation, our next and final mystery brings us back to the early 20th century, where a small Iowa town was shaken to its core by a gruesome mass murder. This is the story of the Villisca Axe Murders. It's a quiet night in the small town of Villisca, Iowa. The date is June 10th, 1912. The Moore family, a well-respected local family of 6, has just returned from a church event and settled into their home for the night. Little do they know that by morning, their home will become the site of one of the most gruesome and puzzling mass murders in American history. The next day, a neighbor, worried that no one had been seen around the Moore home, walked inside and made a horrifying discovery. All 6 members of the Moore family, Father Josiah, Mother Sarah, and their 4 children, had been brutally murdered in their beds with an axe. The 2 Stillinger sisters, who had been spending the night as guests, were also found dead. The killer had bludgeoned each victim in their sleep, delivering horrific blows to their heads with the blunt end of the axe. The scene inside the house was nightmarish. Blood was splattered across the walls and ceilings. The murderer had covered the faces of the victims with bedclothes after killing them, as if trying to conceal their identities, even in death. Even more disturbingly, the killer had lingered in the house after the murders, calmly washing their hands in a basin and covering the mirrors with cloth. The axe was left behind, propped against a wall. Despite the brutal nature of the crime, there were few clues as to who the murderer might be. No one in town reported seeing anything unusual, and there were no signs of forced entry into the house. The lack of clear motive or evidence left investigators baffled. Was it a robbery gone wrong, or had the Moores been targeted for something darker? Over the years, numerous suspects were questioned, but none were ever charged. One of the primary suspects was Reverend George Kelly, a traveling preacher who had been in town the night of the murders. Kelly was known to have a troubled past and had a history of bizarre behavior, including a fascination with the crime. He even confessed to the murders at one point, but his confession was inconsistent, and he was later acquitted due to a lack of evidence. Another suspect was Frank Jones, a prominent local businessman and politician who had a personal grudge against Josiah Moore. Moore had previously worked for Jones and later left to start his own business, taking valuable clients with him. Some believed that Jones hired a hitman to kill the Moores, but no solid evidence ever surfaced to support this theory. Despite these leads, the Villisca Axe murders remain unsolved, and the town of Villisca was never the same after that fateful night. The murders sparked fear and suspicion throughout the small community, with residents locking their doors at night for the first time in the town's history. The house itself became a symbol of horror, and to this day, it remains a chilling reminder of the crime. The Villisca Axe Murder House is now a tourist attraction where visitors can tour the home and even stay overnight, hoping to experience something paranormal or uncover clues that were overlooked. What makes this case so unsettling is the randomness of the crime. Why would someone slaughter an entire family along with 2 young guests in such a brutal and deliberate manner? And why has the killer never been caught, even after over a century of investigation? The mystery continues to fascinate and terrify, leaving us to wonder who could commit such an unspeakable act, and how did they manage to disappear without a trace? As we close out these haunting stories, we're left with more questions than answers. These are mysteries that have baffled detectives, haunted communities, and captivated the world for decades. While time may pass, the weight of these unsolved crimes remains. For the families of the victims, the pain of not knowing lingers every day. And for all of us, these cases serve as a reminder of just how elusive the truth can sometimes be. If this video resonated with you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What theories do you believe? Do you think any of these mysteries will ever be solved? And if you're passionate about uncovering the truth, consider subscribing to our channel. We dive deep into stories like these, stories that deserve to be told and remembered. Your support helps us continue to explore the unsolved, the unknown, and the unexplained. There's a fascinating playlist right there. Happy binging.